Me live now from Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Good to speak to you, Michael. So what do you make of these allegations that Trump may have fired Comey over Flynn and passed on classified information to Lavrov?
Well, President Trump is not handling himself in office the way I would prefer. However, I think all these new calls for his impeachment or removal from office or his supposed guilt of high crimes, all this is probably a bit exaggerated and hyperbolic. What I mean by that is we know that Mr. Trump uses bluster in a fair amount of his communications. And while, therefore, his threat to Comey was not particularly gentlemanly, and it may have straddled the line of illegality, I'm not prepared to conclude that somehow Trump threatened Comey and then fired him because the threat was not properly understood. In other words, I think Trump fired Comey partly because he didn't like him, partly because he thought the guy was not very strong, partly because he had heard a lot of Democrats and Republicans criticize Comey, and the threats and the bluster were part of the equation, but they really were not quite as simple as some have alleged. So that's the kind of interpretation that I would offer. On the classification issue, you know, I think Mr. Trump should not have told the Russian ambassador and foreign minister what he did, but I also think that presidents are always making judgment calls about what kinds of sensitive information to share with other countries they're trying to work with. And in this case, I think Trump made the wrong call, but I would not go so far as to call it criminal. And therefore, I think, again, the allegation that he has been guilty of a major offense against the country's interests, which is enough to warrant, you know, escalating this to a impeachment kind of situation, it, to me, is not convincing. I'm not a supporter of Trump, but I think we're going to have to accept that impeachment is unrealistic at this time.
I mean, also Putin stated that Russia would be willing to release a transcript of the meeting. Can that really make this crisis go away, though?
No, because no one's going to believe what Russia puts forth in a transcript. Everyone's going to assume that whatever Vladimir Putin did not want to appear in the transcript, he simply excised or eliminated or erased before making it public. We know that Mr. Putin is not honest. I mean, most politicians bend the truth, but Putin has been frequently guilty of simply telling falsehoods, including, for example, over the seizure of Crimea in 2014 when he said it wasn't a Russian state action and then later acknowledged that it was. That's just one of many examples. So no, I'm afraid Putin's word can't really clear anything up here.
And what will happen next? How will the National Security Council, the State Department, the foreign policy establishment proceed from here?
Well, I think if you interpret things the way I do, that Mr. Trump has been sloppy but not criminal, then you continue to try to have conversations with him before he gets into big meetings or press conferences about what kinds of information can be conveyed, what kinds of information would be too sensitive or straddle the line of classified or what have you. And frankly, I see this as the education of a president. Unfortunately, Mr. Trump starts from a much lower point of expertise than many of our modern presidents, maybe all of our modern presidents, and it's not clear how much he wants to learn. So this kind of thing could recur, and if it does, I may change my own interpretation and my own assessment and ultimately conclude that he's not fit for office. But my expectation would be that he wants to be a successful president himself, that he's smart enough to know how to do it, he's not very disciplined, and he's going to have to learn that discipline and listen to his advisors, and maybe reorient and restructure the White House team a bit so he hears from the people who know what they're doing and not from some of the more ideological voices as much.
And Trump said earlier that no other politician has been treated this badly as him. What do you make of this remark?
Well, Mr. Trump's not particularly known for his study of history, so what he's referring to, I think, is what he can remember and how things have been in his time. I think probably no president this century has had an equally difficult period with the media and the press, but I think that certainly Bill Clinton had some comparable periods during the impeachment considerations after the Monica Lewinsky affair. I certainly think that Nixon had some comparable moments. And so I think Trump exaggerates here. But I think what he's expressing is a frustration, and I have no doubt that it feels like an unprecedented situation to him, because in his own life, he probably hasn't been treated like this very often. And if he was treated like this, he was in private business. He could walk away from the situation. In this case, he can't.
Thank you very much for joining us here on TRT World. Michael Hanlon there from Washington, D.C., a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution.